In this episode, we're going to slow down and sort out two words that people often use interchangeably even though they solve different problems in a payment environment: tokenization and encryption. When you are new to cybersecurity, both can sound like they simply mean making data unreadable, and that surface similarity can lead teams to pick a solution for the wrong reason or to assume one technique automatically covers what the other is meant to do. In PCI work, especially when you are thinking like a qualified security assessor, QSA, the important skill is not repeating definitions, but understanding the trade-offs that show up in real systems over time. The primary account number, PAN, is a perfect example because it is both extremely sensitive and extremely tempting to store, since many business processes like refunds, chargebacks, and customer support want easy lookups. Choosing wisely means you decide what the business truly needs, what risks you are trying to reduce, how scope will be affected, and what operational burdens you are willing to carry. If you get those choices right, the environment becomes smaller and safer, and your evidence story becomes clearer. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. Tokenization is easiest to understand if you think of it as replacing a sensitive value with a stand-in that has no meaningful value by itself. The stand-in, called a token, is what systems store and use for routine operations, while the real sensitive value is kept in a separate place under stricter control. The most important idea is that the token is not derived from the PAN in a way that can be reversed by math alone. Instead, the token is typically mapped to the original value through a controlled lookup process. That mapping is the heart of tokenization, and it is why tokenization is often used to reduce how widely the PAN spreads through databases, logs, reports, and downstream services. When tokenization is done well, most internal systems never see the PAN at all, which dramatically reduces the chances of accidental storage and reduces the number of places an attacker can steal valuable account numbers. AQSA views this as a scope and exposure strategy because fewer systems handle real card data, which narrows what must be protected at the highest level. Encryption, in contrast, is best understood as transforming data into a protected form using a key, where the protected form can be turned back into the original data by someone who has the correct key. The core strength of encryption is that it protects confidentiality even if storage is accessed, because the stored value is unreadable without the key. That said, encryption does not automatically reduce data spread, because encrypted PAN is still PAN, just protected by cryptography. If the encrypted value exists in many places, those places remain part of the sensitive data story, and they remain targets because an attacker can pursue not only the data but also the keys or the systems that can decrypt. In PCI thinking, encryption is often a protection control, while tokenization can be both a protection control and a scope reduction technique. Beginners sometimes assume encryption solves everything because the data is unreadable, but the real-world question is who can decrypt, how easy it is to misuse that capability, and whether the encryption is consistently applied everywhere the data goes. A helpful way to compare the two is to focus on what each one changes about your environment's daily behavior. Tokenization changes how systems operate because they stop using the real PAN for most processes and start using tokens instead. That affects databases, application logic, reporting, and integrations, because the token becomes the main identifier used in routine workflows. Encryption, on the other hand, may change far less about daily workflows because systems can still store and process the real PAN, just in encrypted form when it is at rest or in transit. The trade-off is that encryption tends to keep sensitive data present across more systems, which can keep scope larger, while tokenization pushes you toward architectural separation, which can shrink scope but requires more careful integration planning. AQSA wants to see that the chosen approach matches the organization's goals and capabilities rather than being selected because it sounded more advanced. The goal is not to chase a buzzword, but to build an environment where sensitive data is rare, controlled, and explainable. When you choose tokenization, You are implicitly choosing to centralize the most sensitive data into a smaller, more controlled zone, because something has to hold the mapping between token and PAN. That central zone might be operated by the merchant or by a specialized provider, but in either case, it becomes a high-value target that must be protected with strong access control, strong monitoring, and strong operational discipline. The upside is that if most internal systems only store tokens, a compromise of those systems may not yield usable card numbers. The downside is that if the token system is compromised, the impact can be severe because it connects tokens to real data. That is why tokenization is not a magic shield. It is a risk-reshaping strategy. You reduce the broad, distributed risk of sensitive data everywhere, but you concentrate critical risk into a smaller component. AQSA evaluating tokenization will look closely at how that component is protected and how access to detokenization is controlled, because the security of the entire model depends on that restraint. When you choose encryption, you are choosing to manage keys as a long-term operational responsibility, because the encryption is only as strong as the key management behind it. Keys must be protected, access must be limited, and the environment must be able to rotate and recover keys without disrupting business. Beginners often imagine keys as simple passwords, but in practice, keys are part of a broader trust system that includes who can use them, where they are stored, how they are backed up, and how usage is logged. If too many systems can decrypt, then encryption becomes less of a barrier and more of a formatting step, because an attacker can aim for the systems that perform decryption or for the people who can access key material. Encryption can still be an excellent control, especially when combined with tight access and strong monitoring, but it does not automatically shrink the payment footprint. AQSA will often ask questions that reveal whether encryption is treated as a lifecycle discipline, because weak lifecycle practices are what lead to bypasses, misconfigurations, and inconsistent coverage. One of the most practical decision points is how much the business needs to retrieve the original PAN during normal operations. If the business rarely needs the full value, tokenization often aligns well because it encourages designs where the full value is accessed only in narrow, well-controlled situations. This is powerful because it aligns security with human behavior. If full PAN access is unusual, then it can be monitored more effectively, reviewed more carefully, and justified more clearly. Encryption, by contrast, can make full PAN access easier to normalize because systems can decrypt as part of routine processing if permissions allow. That can lead to a situation where many services have decryption capabilities simply because it was convenient during development, and over time convenience becomes the default. For AQSA, the most convincing environments are the ones where the organization can demonstrate that full PAN access is limited to a small number of roles and systems with clear business justification. Tokenization often supports that narrative naturally, but only if the organization builds processes that keep detokenization rare and auditable. Another wise comparison is to think about accidental data exposure, because many real incidents are caused by mistakes rather than by sophisticated cryptography failures. Tokenization reduces accidental exposure in places like logs, troubleshooting output, and analytics stores because even if a token leaks, it is not usable as a card number on its own. Encryption does not reduce accidental exposure in the same way, because an encrypted PAN may still be treated as sensitive data in many contexts, and if it is moved around broadly, it can still create compliance and security obligations. Also, teams sometimes mishandle encrypted values by storing them alongside the information needed to decrypt, such as in the same environment or accessible through the same service identity. That kind of mistake undermines the intent of encryption without anyone intending to do anything wrong. Tokenization changes the data that flows through routine systems, which can reduce the chance that the wrong value ends up in the wrong place. AQSA will see this as a risk reduction pattern that makes the environment more forgiving of human error, which is valuable because humans are always part of operations. At the same time, tokenization introduces its own kinds of operational misunderstandings that beginners should watch for. One common misunderstanding is believing that because tokens are not card numbers, they have no sensitivity at all. In reality, tokens can still be sensitive because they can act as pointers into payment processes And in some environments, tokens can be used to initiate actions like recurring billing or refunds. That means token access and token usage must still be controlled, logged, and monitored, especially in systems that can perform payment actions using tokens. The difference is that the token itself is not the PAN, so a data breach involving tokens is often less damaging than a breach involving full card numbers. But it is still a security event that can have consequences. Another misunderstanding is assuming all tokens are equal, when in practice tokens can be limited to specific contexts, merchants, or uses, which affects how risky they are if exposed. AQSA will look for clarity on what the tokens can be used for, because that determines what protections must surround them. Encryption also comes with common misunderstandings that can weaken its real-world value. A frequent one is assuming that because data is encrypted at rest, it is safe even if many applications can decrypt it freely during normal operation. If a compromised application has legitimate decryption access, the attacker does not need to break encryption. They simply use the application's access to obtain plaintext. This is why encryption must be paired with least privilege and strong monitoring, so decryption access is limited and unusual behavior stands out. Another misunderstanding is treating encryption as purely a technical setting rather than a governance discipline. If encryption is enabled inconsistently across data stores, if keys are not rotated, or if access to key usage is not reviewed, the protection becomes uneven and hard to validate. For AQSA, unevenness is a red flag because it suggests drift and hidden pockets of unprotected data. Encryption can be a strong control, but it demands consistent coverage and disciplined key management, and those operational realities should influence whether encryption alone is the right choice for the organization's goals. A wise decision process also considers how tokenization and encryption affect evidence and auditability, because PCI assessments are built on being able to prove what is true. Tokenization often makes the evidence story simpler for many systems, because you can show that the systems in question do not store the PAN at all and instead store tokens. That can reduce the complexity of demonstrating protections for those systems, although it does not eliminate the need to secure them appropriately. The hard evidence focus shifts to the tokenization component and to the systems that can perform token-related payment actions. Encryption keeps the evidence story spread across more systems, because you must show that encryption is applied correctly, that keys are protected, that access is controlled, and that the data is not leaking into unencrypted stores. That can be perfectly achievable, but it can require more ongoing evidence discipline across a wider footprint. AQSA will often see organizations struggle not because they lack encryption, but because they cannot prove its consistent application and key governance at scale. Choosing wisely includes choosing what you can sustain. In many mature environments, the choice is not either tokenization or encryption, but how to combine them thoughtfully without creating confusion. Tokenization can reduce where the PAN appears, and encryption can protect sensitive stores that must still contain the PAN, such as the token vault or other tightly controlled components. When combined well, tokenization limits exposure while encryption adds a strong protective layer where the real data must exist. The risk, however, is that teams may layer both without clear boundaries, leading to inconsistent handling where some systems store encrypted PAN, others store tokens, and nobody can clearly explain which is used where. That lack of clarity makes the environment harder to control and harder to assess. AQSA will pay attention to whether the organization has a clear data handling model that is consistent across applications and integrations. Clarity is what prevents drift, and drift is what undermines both tokenization and encryption over time. Another decision factor that deserves attention is the impact on downstream systems and business workflows, because security strategies fail when they create too much friction for legitimate work. Tokenization requires that downstream systems be designed to use tokens effectively, which may require changes to reporting, reconciliation, and customer support processes. If the organization does not plan those changes, people may invent workarounds that reintroduce PAN storage in uncontrolled ways, like exporting data into spreadsheets or storing values in tickets. Encryption may seem easier because it allows systems to continue working with the original data, but that ease can lead to wider distribution of sensitive values and more systems needing decryption access. The wise approach is to recognize that both strategies require governance, training, and process alignment, not just technical implementation. AQSA will often look for whether the organization has supported the chosen approach with policies that match real workflows and with access controls that prevent easy bypass. When workflow and security are aligned, the control becomes durable instead of fragile. As we wrap up, remember that choosing wisely between tokenization and encryption is really about choosing how you want risk to be shaped across your environment. Tokenization replaces sensitive values with stand-ins, which can dramatically reduce how far the PAN spreads and can reduce scope, but it concentrates critical protection needs into the tokenization system and the detokenization pathways. Encryption protects data using keys, which can be highly effective for confidentiality, but it can leave sensitive data present across more systems and demand strong, sustained key management and access governance. AQSA will be looking for clarity of purpose, consistency of implementation, and evidence that the chosen approach is controlled, monitored, and sustainable. If you keep the focus on data flow, access discipline, operational reality, and proof, you will be able to evaluate these approaches without falling for simplistic assumptions. The best choice is the one that reduces exposure in the ways your environment actually needs, while remaining stable enough that it does not collapse into workarounds when business pressure rises.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit DailyCyber.News.